Mr. Blackthorne, you need to understand, if you donate your bone marrow now, your cancer treatment stops. Permanently. Dr. Matthews' words hung in the air like a death sentence as Lysander Blackthorne stared at the medical chart in his hands. His son Dylan had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Without the transplant, the boy had 6 months to live. With it, Lysander himself would die within weeks. Nurse Zara Okafor stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face, watching the man she'd loved make an impossible choice between his life and their child's future. The silence in room 847 of St. Catherine's Medical Center was deafening. Outside, the October rain hammered against the windows like bullets, but inside, time seemed frozen in that moment when a father discovers he must choose between breathing and giving his child the chance to breathe forever. Lysander Blackthorne, 38, worth $4.2 billion and owner of Blackthorne Technologies, had built his empire on calculated risks. But nothing, not hostile takeovers, not board meetings with sharks, not even his recent terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosis had prepared him for this moment. The moment when the woman he'd abandoned 7 years ago would look him in the eyes and whisper the words that shattered his carefully constructed world. Lysander, Dylan is your son. What Lysander didn't know was that finding Zara again wasn't coincidence, it was destiny wrapped in tragedy. For 7 years he'd searched for her. 7 years of hiring private investigators, scanning hospital databases, following false leads across 3 states. He'd built his fortune, but every success felt hollow because the only woman he'd ever loved had vanished from his life. The night he made the biggest mistake of his existence. 7 years ago, when Zara told him she was pregnant, Lysander had panicked. At 31, he was just starting to build his tech company, drowning in debt and 18-hour workdays. The thought of becoming a father terrified him more than any business risk ever had, so he did what cowards do, he ran. He told Zara he wasn't ready, that a baby would destroy everything he was working toward, that maybe they should take a break until he got his life together. He'd expected her to fight for him, to convince him they could make it work. Instead, Zara had looked at him with eyes full of disappointment and quiet dignity and said, "I understand. I won't contact you again." She kept that promise for 7 years. What Zara didn't tell him that night was that she'd already fallen in love with the baby growing inside her. She'd already imagined their future together, all 3 of them. When Lysander walked away, she made a decision that would define her life. She would love their child enough for 2 parents, and she would never let Dylan feel unwanted by creating false hope about a father who didn't want to be found. Now, as Lysander stared at the medical chart that contained his son's death sentence, he realized that all his wealth, all his success, all the years spent searching for the woman he'd lost, none of it mattered if he couldn't save the child they'd created together. "How long have you known I was Dylan's father?" Lysander's voice cracked as he looked at Zara, seeing not just the professional nurse who'd been caring for him for 2 weeks, but the woman he dreamed about every night for 7 years. "Since the day they brought you into the cancer ward," Zara replied, her voice barely steady. "You haven't changed as much as you think, Lysander. Same green eyes Dylan inherited. Same stubborn jaw. Same way of running your hand through your hair when you're thinking." Her voice broke. "I knew immediately, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. You were just another patient. Dylan was just another child I was helping through treatment. I could keep them separate, but you couldn't." "No, because when they ran the donor compatibility tests for Dylan, your name came up as a perfect match. And suddenly, the man who abandoned me was the only person on earth who could save our son." Lysander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of cosmic justice. The universe had given him a chance to undo his greatest mistake, but the price would be everything he'd worked to build, including his life. Does Dylan know? He knows his father is a businessman who travels. He's been asking about you more lately, especially since he got sicker. I think part of him knows something's missing. Tears rolled down Zara's cheeks. "Lysander, he's the most incredible little boy. He's brave and funny and so smart it scares me sometimes. He draws pictures of superhero dads and asks me if his daddy is strong enough to fight monsters. All this time, I never told him that the strongest monster we'd ever face was already inside his blood." The irony wasn't lost on Lysander. For 7 years, he'd built an empire trying to prove he was worthy of the family he'd walked away from. Now he'd discovered that the only way to truly prove his worth was to give up everything, his company, his fortune, his life, to save the son who'd never known his name. "I want to meet him before the surgery," Lysander said quietly. "And then we do the..." Transplant immediately. Dr. Matthews shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Blackthorne, this decision will end your cancer treatment permanently. You'll have 4 to 6 weeks at most, I understand. Lysander's voice carried the quiet certainty of a man who'd finally found his purpose. Doctor, I spent 7 years trying to buy back a woman's love and earn the right to be a father. Turns out, the price was always going to be everything I have. What happened next would change not just Dylan's future, but reveal the true depth of a love that had survived 7 years of separation, regret, and impossible circumstances. The walk to the pediatric oncology ward felt like walking toward redemption. Each step echoed in the sterile hallway, marking the distance between the man Lysander had been and the father he was about to become. Zara walked beside him, her professional composure barely containing 7 years of buried love, anger, and hope. He's in room 312, she said softly. He chose the Superman decorations when he was admitted. He said Superman was strong enough to fight invisible monsters. Her voice caught. He has no idea he's about to meet his own superhero. Through the small window in the door, Lysander saw his son for the first time. Dylan Okafor was small for 6 years old, made smaller by the hospital bed that seemed to swallow his fragile frame. Chemotherapy had taken his hair, but it couldn't touch the spark in those green eyes. Lysander's eyes that looked up from a coloring book with curiosity and intelligence. "Oh God," Lysander whispered, his knees nearly giving out. "Zara, he looks just like you did when I fell in love with you," she finished quietly. "He has your eyes, your smile, your way of concentrating when he's working on something important. But he has my stubborn streak and my tendency to ask questions that adults don't want to answer." Lysander placed his hand on the door handle, then stopped. "What if he doesn't like me? What if I say something wrong? I've never been around children, and I'm about to meet my son for the first and last time." "Then you tell him the truth," Zara said, her voice soft but firm. "You tell him you've been looking for him his whole life, and that meeting him is the greatest moment of yours." Lysander pushed open the door, and 6-year-old Dylan looked up from his coloring book. For a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, father and son simply stared at each other, taking in the features they shared, the invisible bond that DNA had created but circumstances had never allowed them to explore. "Are you my daddy?" Dylan's question was direct, innocent, and devastating in its simplicity. Children, Lysander realized, had a way of cutting through complications and getting straight to the heart of what mattered most. "Yes," Lysander said, his voice breaking with 7 years of longing. "I'm your daddy, and I've been looking for you your whole life." Dylan studied him with the serious expression children wear when they're processing information that will reshape their understanding of the world. "Mommy said you were on business trips. Are you done traveling now?" "Yes, son. I'm never leaving again." "Good," Dylan said matter-of-factly. "I have leukemia and I need a daddy to help me fight it." "Are you strong enough to fight monsters?" Lysander sat down beside the bed, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't think about profit margins or stock prices or quarterly reports. All he could think about was the brave little boy asking him to be a hero. "Yes, Dylan, I'm strong enough. But it's going to require me to do something very brave, and I wanted to ask you if you thought I could do it." Dylan's face lit up with interest. "What kind of brave thing?" "The doctors need to take something from inside my bones to help make you better. It's called bone marrow, and it's like giving you some of my strength to help you fight the monsters in your blood." Lysander paused, choosing his words carefully. "But after I do this, I'm going to get very sick myself. Do you think your daddy is brave enough to do something that's scary if it means saving you?" Dylan's 6-year-old mind processed this with the clarity that only children possess. "Daddy, if you save me, then I can grow up and be strong like you. And then I can take care of Mommy when she gets old, and she won't be sad anymore about missing you." The wisdom of that statement hit Lysander like a physical blow. In one sentence, his son had identified the sacrifice, understood its purpose, and found meaning in the mathematics of love that had eluded adults for months. "Yes," Lysander whispered, tears streaming down his face. "That's exactly right, son." Dylan reached for his father's hand with the fearless trust that children extend to the adults they love. "Daddy, will you stay with me until the operation?" "Mommy says holding hands makes the scared feelings smaller." "I'll stay with you until the very end," Lysander promised, and meant it in every way that mattered. The bone marrow donation surgery was scheduled for the following morning. That night, as the hospital settled into its quiet evening rhythm, Lysander lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, processing the most profound 24 hours of his life. Tomorrow, he would give his son the gift of a future. In 4 to 6 weeks, he would close his eyes for the last time, knowing he'd finally gotten the priorities right. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zara's face from 7 years ago, young, hopeful, glowing with the news of their pregnancy. He remembered the exact moment when fear had overtaken love, when his dreams of business success had seemed more important than the family they could have built together. The memory haunted him with surgical precision. He'd been so focused on proving himself worthy of success that he'd walked away from the only success that actually mattered. Now, with death approaching like a predetermined appointment, he understood with crystal clarity that every dollar he'd earned, every company he'd acquired, every victory he'd celebrated in corporate boardrooms, all of it had been meaningless noise designed to drown out the silence left by the woman and child he'd abandoned. The irony was devastating. He'd spent 7 years building wealth to prove he was worthy of Zara's love, when what she'd actually needed was simply for him to stay. To choose love over fear. To understand that real success wasn't measured in stock prices or profit margins, but in the trust of a woman who believed in you, and the laughter of a child who called you daddy. At 11:47 p.m., Zara knocked softly on his door. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, stepping into the dim room. "Too much to think about," Lysander replied, sitting up. "Zara, I need you to know something before tomorrow. I've spent 7 years searching for you. 7 years hiring investigators, checking hospital databases, following leads that never went anywhere. Every woman with dark hair I saw on the street made my heart stop, hoping it might be you." Zara's composure finally cracked. "Why? You're the one who left. You're the one who said a baby would destroy your dreams." "Because I was an idiot," Lysander said simply. "Because about 6 months after I walked away, I realized I'd thrown away the only thing that actually mattered. I'd built my company, made my first $1 million, and none of it meant anything, because the woman I loved was gone, and I didn't even know if my child had been born healthy. You could have tried harder to find us. I did try. But you'd moved, changed your phone number, and your nursing school had strict privacy policies. It was like you'd vanished." His voice broke. "I deserve that. I deserve to spend 7 years wondering what I'd lost. But Zara, I need you to know not a single day passed that I didn't think about you. Not a single success I achieved felt complete because you weren't there to share it." Zara sat down in the chair beside his bed, 7 years of suppressed emotion finally finding its voice. "Do you know what it was like? Being 19, pregnant, and having the only man you've ever loved tell you that your baby was an inconvenience? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was making the right decision keeping Dylan?" "I was wrong about everything," Lysander whispered. "I thought a baby would destroy my dreams. I didn't understand that my dreams were worthless if they didn't include the family we could have built together. And now? What are your dreams now?" Lysander looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd entered his room. 7 years had matured her beauty, added depth to her eyes and strength to her bearing. She was no longer the college student he'd fallen in love with. She was a woman who'd raised their child alone, built a career saving other people's children, and carried the weight of single motherhood with a grace he was only beginning to understand. "My dreams now are very simple," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, I want to save my son's life. And tonight, before I lose my chance forever, I want to dance with the only woman I've ever loved." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 7 years of separation and the knowledge that tomorrow would begin a countdown to goodbye. "Lysander..." Zara's voice was barely a whisper. "I know it's selfish. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I put you through. But Zara, in 4 to 6 weeks, I'm going to die. And I can't die knowing that I never got to hold you again. Never got to tell you how sorry I am. Never got to show you that I finally understand what love really means." Tears were streaming down Zara's face now, 7 years of buried love and anger and hope finally finding release. "You want to dance? Here? Now? I want to dance with you like I should have danced with you at our wedding. I want to hold you like I should have held you when you told me you were pregnant. I want to love you like I should have loved you every day for the past 7 years." His voice broke completely. "Please, Zara, give me one dance before I give you and Dylan everything I should have given you from the beginning." What Zara saw in his eyes wasn't the scared young man who'd walked away from responsibility 7 years ago. What she saw was a father willing to die for his child. A man who'd spent 7 years learning what really mattered, and the only person she'd ever loved completely. "There's no music," she whispered, but she was already standing up. "There's been music in my head every time I've thought about you for 7 years." Lysander replied, getting out of bed and extending his hand toward her. "All we need is each other." When Zara placed her hand in his, 7 years of separation melted away. They moved together slowly, carefully, finding their rhythm in the quiet hospital room, lit only by the soft glow of medical monitors. There was no orchestra, no dance floor, no audience, just two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again just in time to say goodbye properly. "I missed you every single day," Lysander whispered as they swayed together. "Every decision I made, every success I achieved, every moment I should have been happy, there was always this empty space where you and Dylan should have been." "I missed you too," Zara admitted against his shoulder. "I told myself I hated you, but I never stopped loving you. When Dylan would ask about his daddy, I had to leave the room sometimes because talking about you hurt too much." They danced in silence for several minutes, both knowing this was their first and last dance, both memorizing every second of holding each other again. "Zara," Lysander said softly, "after tomorrow, when I start getting sicker, I want you to know that these past 2 weeks getting to know our son, seeing the incredible woman you've become, having this moment with you, these have been the most important weeks of my life." "Lysander, let me finish. When I'm gone, I want you to find someone who deserves you. Someone who will be a good stepfather to Dylan and who will make you happy in all the ways I was too scared to try. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll tell Dylan that his father loved him more than life itself. Promise me you'll tell him that meeting him was worth everything I had to give up. And promise me that when he's old enough to understand, you'll tell him that his parents had one perfect dance before his daddy went to sleep forever." Zara was sobbing now, but she continued dancing, holding on to this moment with everything she had. "I promise." "But Lysander, I need you to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you won't be afraid. Promise me you'll know that what you're doing tomorrow makes you the hero of our story, not the villain. Promise me you'll die knowing you were loved." "I promise," Lysander whispered, and sealed it with a kiss that contained 7 years of regret, love, and goodbye. They danced until the sun began to rise, two souls finding peace in each other's arms, before facing the day that would save their son and break their hearts forever. At 6 a.m., the surgical team came to prepare Lysander for the bone marrow donation. Dylan was already in the pediatric surgical suite, brave and ready for the transplant that would save his life. As they wheeled Lysander toward the operating room, he caught Zara's hand one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For giving me a son to save. For giving me a reason to finally do something worthy of the love you offered me 7 years ago. For dancing with me one last time." The bone marrow donation surgery took 4 hours and was completely successful. Dylan's body accepted the transplant without complications, and within days, it was clear that the treatment would be entirely effective. The leukemia went into immediate remission, Dylan's strength returned rapidly, and his prognosis was excellent. Lysander had saved his son's life. But as predicted, Lysander's own health declined rapidly. Without cancer treatment, the disease spread aggressively. He had maybe 3 weeks left, possibly less. Those 3 weeks became the most precious time any of them had ever experienced. Lysander spent every waking moment with Dylan, making up for 7 years of missed bedtime stories, birthday celebrations, and everyday moments that fathers and sons share. He taught Dylan about business and courage and the importance of keeping promises. But mostly, he just loved him openly, completely, desperately, trying to fit a lifetime of fatherhood into the time he had left. Dylan, with the remarkable adaptability of children, embraced his father's presence with pure joy. He seemed to instinctively understand that their time together was special, precious in ways that required him to soak up every lesson, every laugh, every moment of connection. They built pillow forts in the hospital room, read superhero comic books, and shared stories about what it meant to be brave when the world felt scary. "Daddy," Dylan said one afternoon as they colored together, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you." "No, son," Lysander replied gently. "I want you to be better than me. I want you to be brave enough to choose love first, always. Promise me that." "I promise, Daddy." The simple exchange broke Lysander's heart and healed it simultaneously. His son would grow up understanding what it took Lysander 38 years to learn. That love was always the most important choice. And every evening, after Dylan fell asleep, Lysander and Zara would dance. Sometimes in his hospital room, sometimes in the family lounge, sometimes just swaying together beside their son's bed as he slept peacefully, finally healthy and strong. They talked about the past, planned for Dylan's future, and loved each other with the intensity of people who knew their time was measured in days. "I used to wonder what would have happened if you hadn't left," Zara told him one evening as they moved slowly to music only they could hear. "I used to imagine our wedding, Dylan growing up with his father, all of us being a normal family. And now? Now, I think maybe this is how it was always supposed to be. Maybe you needed to become the man who would die for his son. Maybe I needed to become strong enough to raise him alone. Maybe Dylan needed to see what real love looks like, love that sacrifices everything. Do you think he'll remember me? Lysander, you're giving him the rest of his life. How could he forget the father who loved him enough to trade his tomorrow for Dylan's forever?" On a Thursday evening in early November, 3 weeks after the successful bone marrow transplant, Lysander knew his time was almost over. Dylan had been discharged from the hospital the previous week with a clean bill of health, and was staying with Zara's sister so he could attend school and play with other children like any normal, healthy 6-year-old. That night, Zara found Lysander in the hospital's family chapel, sitting quietly in the last pew. "How are you feeling?" she asked, though she already knew. His skin had taken on the pale, translucent quality of someone whose body was shutting down. He'd lost significant weight, and his breathing was labored. "Peaceful," he said, and meant it. "Zara, I want you to take Dylan home tonight. Don't let him come back to the hospital." "Lysander, please, I don't want his last memory of his father to be watching me die. I want him to remember the man who taught him to be brave, not the man who couldn't be brave anymore." Zara sat beside him in the chapel, and they held hands like they had every evening for the past 3 weeks. "What do you want me to tell him?" "Tell him his daddy went to sleep thinking about how proud he is of his strong, brave, wonderful son. Tell him that every time he accomplishes something amazing, and he will accomplish amazing things, his father will be celebrating in heaven, and tell him ... double quotes, Lysander's voice broke. "Tell him that dying to save him was the greatest privilege of my life. I will, I promise." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both knowing this was goodbye. "Zara, will you dance with me one more time?" Without a word, she stood and took his hand. They moved slowly, carefully, Lysander's weakened body supported by 7 years of love and the knowledge that in saving Dylan, he had finally become the man she'd always believed he could be. "I love you," he whispered as they swayed together in the empty chapel. "I've loved you every day for 7 years, and I'll love you whatever comes next." "I love you too," she replied, tears flowing freely. "Thank you for saving our son. Thank you for teaching me that love really can conquer everything. Thank you for showing Dylan what a real hero looks like." Lysander Blackthorne died peacefully in his sleep at 3:17 a.m. on November 8th, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after donating his bone marrow to save his son's life. His last conscious thought was of dancing with Zara, and of Dylan running healthy and strong toward a future that stretched out bright and limitless before him. The funeral was small but profound. Dylan, wearing his best suit and carrying a handmade card addressed, "To my daddy in heaven," stood between his mother and the hospital staff who had witnessed the most beautiful love story any of them had ever seen. But the real memorial happened every evening in the small apartment that Zara and Dylan shared, where a 6-year-old boy would ask his mother to put on music and dance with him in the living room. "Mommy," Dylan said one evening about a month after the funeral, "when we dance like this, I can feel Daddy dancing with us. Is that silly?" "No, baby," Zara replied, spinning him around their tiny living room. "That's not silly at all. Daddy is always dancing with us now." 6 months later, Dylan was completely healthy, growing like a weed, and attending regular school like any other child his age. His hair had grown back thick and curly, and his green eyes sparkled with the joy of a child who had beaten impossible odds and been loved beyond measure. But every evening, without fail, he asked his mother to dance with him. And every evening, Zara would hold her son and move to music that reminded her of 3 weeks when love conquered death, when a coward became a hero, and when a father's sacrifice gave his child the gift of forever. "Tell me the story again," Dylan would ask as they danced. "About how Daddy saved me." And Zara would tell him about a man who spent 7 years searching for the family he'd lost, who discovered his son just in time to save him, and who proved that love really is stronger than monsters, even the monster of death itself. Dylan kept his father's legacy alive in ways Lysander never could have imagined. He grew up kind, brave, and determined to help other children who were facing impossible battles. The inheritance Lysander left funded scholarships for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees, research grants for childhood cancer treatment, and a foundation that helped families navigate the terrifying world of pediatric oncology. But mostly, Dylan kept his father's memory alive by dancing. Every evening, every celebration, every moment of joy he danced with the absolute certainty that somewhere, somehow his father was dancing with him. And in those dances, in that joy, in that life that stretched ahead full of possibilities, Lysander Blackthorne lived forever not as the billionaire who built an empire, but as the father who gave everything to ensure his son's tomorrow would be brighter than his own yesterday. If this story of ultimate sacrifice and unconditional love moved you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that the most powerful force in the universe isn't money or success or fame, it's a parent's love for their child, and the courage to dance with death itself to ensure that love lives on.